This is nearly $1,000 worth of walnut. And this is the first piece of furniture I ever built.
Wrong.
Well, kinda. And finally, this is my wife, and she deserves a new dining room table. So the question is, can I take this and replace this to surprise and meet the expectations of this? Wait, wrong photo. This. So you know that I'm building a table for my wife, and you know that it's going to be made out of walnut. But the whole process starts right here, where I lay out all 7 pieces of the wood that I got. And this is the start of the process to decide which pieces I'm going to use for which part of the table. At this point, I'm concentrated on finding the best pieces to use for the tabletop. And this time I'm actually cheating a little bit because my buddy Garrett over at Baker Hardwoods had already sent me a couple pictures, so I knew that I had 2 bookmatched pieces to fit in the center. However, I wasn't fully sure about which 2 pieces were going to fit on the outside or which orientation I would arrange them in. And even with 2 of the 4 pieces already decided for me, I still can't make up my mind. And I'll just tell you now that until these things are glued up, it is always subject to change. But for now, I have made my selections, measured to make sure that I have more than enough, and ready to move on. I've got these 2 pieces of book-matched walnut that are going to act as the center of the table. And the final width of the table will be around 37 inches. After these are glued up, I'll probably be somewhere around 24 inches. And the reason why I'm processing these first is because I want to know exactly how much more width I'm going to need, so that I don't waste any of the 2 outside pieces, because the leftover from those will be used as the side aprons. So I'm gonna cut these down and square them up, that way I know exactly what to rip the other 2 at. Hang with me here because I'm considering using a trick that I've used in the past to make the tabletop appear a little bit thicker than these boards are right now. One thought that I find interesting is that basically every piece of furniture that I build is really the second life for the wood that it's made out of. For example, our current table is made from reclaimed pine that came from my great-grandmother's barn that was built over 100 years ago. And I'm not overly sentimental, but I do like a good story. So whenever I can, I like to ask about the history of the wood that I'm using. And luckily, the guys at Baker Hardwoods processed this lumber from start to finish, and they actually knew quite a bit about it. So when I asked, not only did I get the background on these boards, but I also learned 2 really interesting things. So this walnut is from right off the Red River, which forms the border between Texas and Oklahoma. I know, not that interesting, but the Red River is also known for a couple of things. It has extremely fertile soil, and it also floods pretty frequently. And that's partly due to the really strong winds that run through the valley. It's also famous for its iron-rich clay, which is what makes the Red River, well, red. But the clay also creates an ideal floodplain for hardwood trees to grow in. So here's the first thing that I learned. Trees that grow in river bottom, or sometimes called bottomland, are highly sought after because of the high winds and the constantly shifting water levels. Those are the things that create a lot of stress on the trees, which in turn create all the figuring and curling grain. But it's also one of the only ways to get such deep colors and variation of color. Most of the time, these trees or logs are going to be turned into slabs, but some of the smaller trees that are closer to 25 or 30 inches wide make perfect dimensional lumber. Now, the difficult part comes after milling, because obviously this has to be dried, but there's really only one way to do that while still preserving all of those deep, dark tones. Which leads me to the second thing that I learned. Most kiln drying processes include something called conditioning. And this is where at the end of drying out the boards, moisture is reintroduced. The kiln is basically filled back up with steam to relieve any final stress in the boards and make them more workable. But this process also mutes all of those dark browns and rich purples. It basically cooks the life out of the lumber. But this walnut was smoked like a perfect brisket. Low and slow, baby. So I jokingly made reference to meeting the high expectations of my wife. And in all fairness, while she definitely is more picky about her furniture choices than, say, I don't know, the man she chose to marry, it's honestly a little bit less about her expectations and more about her style. In the past, I have built her things like this and this. And if you can't tell, she certainly has a specific style. French country, kind of vintage English. I don't know, just don't call it farmhouse. And while this whole project was supposed to be a surprise for her, I've already blown that. So at this point, I might as well include her in the design. All right, I know that you have a particular vision for this table, and I've taken note and paid attention. I've created a design.
Okay. Ooh, okay, like the legs.
Spindle legs.
Yeah.
Got the little mouse holes in the aprons.
Yeah, I like that.
And a shape in the apron.
Is that what that thing is?
Uh-huh, that's the end apron.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. These are a little bigger, I think. I feel like I have to see it. I'm like, what though?
Well, that's not much of an option.
I know. It's gonna be dark, right?
Yeah, it's the walnut that's out in the garage.
Okay. Timeless, I think, right?
Something like that.
Spicy. I like it. I like the ball things at the bottom. How are you gonna make 4 the exact same though?
Don't know yet.
They don't have those on Amazon.
Okay, I think she liked it. Maybe she didn't love it the way that I wanted her to, but don't worry, I've got a surprise that will push this one over the top. And also, at least my dog loved it. With that out of the way, I can get back to the tabletop. And with the glue dried, I can get this thing out of the clamps and move on to the next step. Now, I've decided that because I have to sand and level the top, now seems like a pretty good time to go ahead and fill all of these knots and cracks with epoxy. That way I can sand it down all at once, because we're all looking for a way to sand a little bit less in our lives. I'm not really sure if this is a tip or a trick, but I like to circle all the spots that need to be filled with chalk before I mix the epoxy so that I'm not rushing and inevitably miss one. Not that I've ever done that. It just seems like a good idea. I'm sure you've noticed by now that this tabletop is 1 inch thick, which tends to be on the thinner side of what I would like to do. But since there's going to be an apron that's going to sit about 1 inch inside of the tabletop, I'm not super concerned about that thickness looking too small. However, I still want to try a trick that I've used in the past, and it's pretty simple. I'm going to measure 1.5 inches in and use my track saw to cut off a thin piece. That piece will then flip and roll under the tabletop to make the table appear thicker than it is. Now, the only reason that this works is because you create sort of this mirrored grain match look. With this flipped up under like this, you can see what I'm talking about, where the grain is matching up perfectly, and once it's sanded and level, you honestly really wouldn't be able to tell at all that it was 2 pieces of wood. It comes down to the fact that I think this is too thick, and if I planed the bottom piece to make it a little bit thinner, then the symmetry wouldn't be the same, and I think it would throw the whole thing off. So ultimately, I am going to opt out on the tabletop thickening trick. But I do need to get the other side and the ends of this table cut down. So mistake is always inevitable, and this is a tough one because I always try to plan for this. I measured to make sure that when I cut this thing down, I wouldn't be cutting into my dominoes. Here we are. And there's really only one way to fix this, and it's basically to make another cut, and the table will end up being about 1 inch shorter. In this scenario, it's fine because it's mine. Also, the space could probably use a slightly smaller table, so at the end of the day, not the worst thing, but still tough pill to swallow. If you were listening closely earlier, you may have heard my wife ask how I was going to make the table legs, because I don't have a lathe, so I did what every sensible woodworker would do. I went online and bought a lathe. And while it seems unlikely that I would be able to learn how to turn in a few days, maybe this is just my Rocky Balboa moment. Alright, enough of that. So if any of you know anything about turning wood, then, well, congratulations, you already know more about it than I do. But one thing that I did learn is that the transition between the post of the leg and the actual turned part of the leg is a pretty difficult one. And I'm not really sure if this is something that other people do or not, but I added a little kerf to make that transition a little easier. So as I start to mark for center on all these legs and chuck this thing up, well, I think that's what it's called, I'm starting to get a little nervous. But when that hat comes off and the face mask goes on, I know my training will kick in. I'm kidding. I almost have no clue what I'm doing. But I am happy to tell you what I tried to do. So first I'm just roughing this thing down, which basically means that I take it from a square to a circle. Or I guess maybe a cylinder. And from there I can measure and mark out some of the features of the table. Now, the first places that I'm marking are going to be the thinnest portion of the leg, or the coves. Then I can put my skew on those and come back and mark the center of the outer points, or the beads. And I've heard people say that the first leg takes the longest because you're essentially creating the blueprint and trying to perfect it. And that is true, you do have a lot of freedom on the first one that you do because you're not trying to match anything else. It's kind of like abstract art versus trying to draw something specific. There's a lot of freedom in the first one, and the second one actually takes a real technique. Speaking of skill and technique, you may notice that I'm using carbide-tipped turning tools, not traditional skew chisels or bowl gouges. And I think traditional wood turners would probably call this cheating, and honestly, I'm not sure that I would disagree with that. But these tools allowed me to achieve what I was going for without having to master the lathe, or at least the big boy tools. And I gotta say, this went a lot smoother than I thought it would. Once I had most of the basic shapes for each feature done, I could sand it down, and just like that, you've got a table leg. Then on to leg number 2, I'm already comfortable with these tools, I'm feeling good. What could possibly go wrong? Dang it. Boy, I got lucky. I guess moving the tool rest while the lathe is running might be something you shouldn't do. Okay, so here's what I was talking about earlier, where now I don't really have as much freedom and I actually have to truly duplicate that first leg. And look, I'll be the first to admit that none of these legs are going to be the exact same. But as long as I can keep it within my variance tolerance, I think I'll be good. So I've mentioned a few times that this table was supposed to be a surprise for my wife. And surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, the thing that gave it away was the lathe. Hiding this project from her was probably never going to happen anyway, because obviously that's my garage and she goes through here multiple times a day. Plus, she typically knows what projects I'm working on, or at least sees parts of them. And I was aware that she pretty much knows what tools I have, or maybe has an idea of when I add a new one. But I didn't know that she knows what all of their functions are, so she pretty much knew what the lathe meant right away. And this is mostly a cautionary tale for trying to sneak new tools into your shop. She knows. Trust me, she knows. And finally, after days of turning, I finally have 4 kind of matching legs. So the tabletop is ready to go. I finally finished all the legs. Now I can turn my attention to the aprons. I've milled up what I need from the cut-offs of the tabletop, and now I need to focus on shaping them. If you remember, in the apron design, there's sort of this scalloped look that's about an inch inside the leg. What I've done is taken 1/2 inch MDF, and I'm going to create a template out of this that I can then route into the aprons. To make this template, I'm measuring in about an inch. Then I'll use my hole saw to cut the rounded shape into the template, then do a rip cut on that. Then I can take my router and start shaping the aprons. There's a couple of different ways that you can use these templates. Obviously, they're made for a router and a shaping bit, which I'm definitely going to use. But since my material is only 1 inch thick, I thought maybe I could use just my router and do it in, well, more than a few passes. But more than a few turned into way too many. And I probably could have taken some deeper passes here to make it a little bit quicker, but ultimately, this was not the answer. So I pretty quickly decided that I would try the second option, which is to route that first layer, then use the jigsaw to cut the excess off, and then you're just flush trimming the rest down. And I'm really glad that I started with the end aprons to figure out the fastest method, because these sides would have taken forever with just the router. With all of the aprons now shaped, I can move on to the second design detail on these pieces. And I'm calling this the mouse hole. It's really just a pattern that's going to be routed into these aprons. So I made myself another template to make this shape. Yeah, it looks like a mouse hole. Now, to get these spaced out evenly on each piece, the first thing that I need to do is go back to my template and measure where each of these are going to go. Then same process where I'll take my shaping bit and route the shape about, I don't know, maybe 3/16 of an inch deep into the aprons. One thing that I've always struggled with, or maybe just questioned, is how far is too far when it comes to designs and design features? And the question that I think most people ask themselves is, how much is too much? But most of the time you also don't figure out the answer to that question until it's too late. I am no exception to this. It feels like I never know when to stop. One thing that has helped me outside of, well, just learning from experience is the drawings that I do. And I know they're not 3D CAD perfect drawings, but it at least visualizes some of the ideas that I have and informs whether maybe I should dial it back. So if you were paying close attention, you may have noticed that these aprons are just slightly longer than the templates that I use to shape them. And that's because I'm going to use mortise and tenon joinery. Perfect timing for me to try out this Ryoba saw and chisel that my friends over at Suizan sent me. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you know that I'm a pretty big fan of the Festool domino. However, with this more traditional table design, I figured that I should use a more traditional joinery method. Oh, and maybe along the way I could prove to some of you, and maybe even myself, that I'm a real woodworker. So I'm channeling my inner Andy Rawls and using hand tools to do some traditional methods of joinery. And first, I just gotta say, this Suizan Ryoba saw is awesome. It's perfect for cutting tenons because it has different blade patterns on each side, so you can cross-cut and rip-cut. And after just a little bit of cleanup with the chisel and hand plane, this first one's looking pretty good. And now I just have 3 more to do. Thanks again for sending the tools, Suizan. Okay, and for my power tool friends, don't worry, I've got something for you too. So I'm loading up my dado stack here because the end aprons are short enough that I can use my miter gauge and a table saw to cut the tenons. And this was actually pretty interesting because I got to cut the exact same tenons 2 completely different ways and kind of compare which ones are better or faster. I'll let you go ahead and use your imagination to decide which one was faster and more accurate. And from there we can go directly into mortising the legs that those tendons will fit into. Now, let me tell you that this is one of those moments that is just pretty scary. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch my last video where I built an epoxy table and gave it away, but ultimately I came to the conclusion that while epoxy can be fun, I enjoy the high stakes part of the build to be done with the tools in my hand. And boy, did I get what I was asking for, because I've got one opportunity to get these mortises done correctly. I could not imagine having to turn another one of these legs at this point in the build. With all my mortise and tenons done, I can move on to the last couple of steps before I assemble the base. The first thing that I have to do is add a roundover detail to the posts of these legs. You may have noticed that I did not put a smile on these legs, which is a tapering transition from the post down to the leg. And that's because I'm going to include what I believe is a English influenced design detail. I think it's pretty cool and makes it a little bit different than other tables out there. From there, I can move on to the center stretcher, which is just a single board that's going to run from one side apron to the other side apron to make the base stronger and keep everything nice and tight. Now you can take some points away from me here because I did decide to use the domino. And lastly, I've got to spend way too much time sanding, but don't worry, I will not make you watch that. So to be completely honest here, these mortise and tenons did not just come together effortlessly. I definitely had to make some adjustments to each one and play with them quite a bit to get them to fit properly. And it's probably because I cut them by hand and, well, that's never perfect. But at the end of the day, they did all come together. And this sort of leads me into something that I've been thinking about and I've seen quite a few people comment about, which is this idea of showing your mistakes versus fabricating problems just to get more views on YouTube. And mostly I've seen people say that they enjoy seeing the mistakes that are made, not only because they can learn, but also it just feels more human. But I've also seen comments accusing people of manufacturing mistakes for the drama that it adds. And I get it. I don't want to watch scripted reality TV furniture building on YouTube either. But honestly, I can't imagine having to create or lie about making a mistake. I guess I can only speak for myself, but there's no shortage of those around here. Why is that so much shorter? Oh my gosh. You've got to be kidding me. I made this like 2 inches too short because I wasn't thinking. Come back and redo that piece. Dang it. Okay, in all honesty, obviously that's not that big of a fix. A small mistake that doesn't affect the outcome of the table or visually impact it. But hey, I got to get my views somehow. And with that problem fixed, I can move on to the last detail of this table base, which is just creating these little buttons that I'll use to attach the tabletop to the base. Okay, I've been holding out for this moment because I promised you at the beginning of the video that I had a special surprise for my wife that would take this table to the next level. You guys know how I'm building the table for Mommy?
Yeah.
Okay, I need y'all's help to help me surprise her. Can you do that?
Yeah.
So the first thing that we have to do is trace all of your hands onto a piece of paper. Can you guys help me do that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hold your breath though. Let's start with him.
Thank you, Daddy.
You're welcome, buddy. Good job. Don't move it. For the big surprise, I traced our kids' hands, snapped a few photos, and brought them into my computer where I could digitize them. From there, I just had to perfect the outline of each handprint. Then I could bring it into my 3D printing software where I could test it a few times until I got a perfect router template. So this idea came from something that I think is relatively common, but when I was a kid and we would lay cement, one thing that we would do is always put our handprint in it before it dried. Now, obviously, I can't do exactly that, but this is what I came up with that I thought was something close to it. I think the whole idea is to add something to this that reminds you of the time and memories that you had when it was built. And bonus points if you can make some memories while you're doing it. Now, if you haven't guessed, we're doing epoxy inlays, and I wanted to let each kid choose which color their handprint would be. But because of the dark walnut, we decided that doing a white base layer would help. And then with each of their help, we could fill their handprints with their colored epoxy. Good job, dude.
They're lies.
Yeah, there's lilies, yeah.
They're collies.
That's collies, that's right.
That's Kobe's hand.
That's Gopi's hand, yep.
Cool.
So with that knocked out, I can finally move to the final steps of this table. And first is sanding the edges of the table. And I love this 90-degree guide to make sure that I'm sanding the edges perfectly flat. Then sanding up to 220 and hitting the edges with a 1/16 inch roundover. And this is obviously all in preparation for my favorite finish. I've said it once, I'll say it again, I might say it every video. When that smell hits your nose, you know you are almost done with the project, and there's nothing quite like it. And I guess besides the smell, I really do like the finish that Rubio provides. And this is just their basic hard wax oil, they call it pure. So no color additives, no stain, no tint, but this walnut doesn't need any of that. Remember how I said that this came from bottomland, which created some serious movement and figure in this wood? Well, look at this curly walnut come to life. I know for every woodworker and furniture maker that this is one of the most exciting parts, getting that oil on there and seeing the walnut pop. But honestly, as I wiped it down, I couldn't wait to see what it would look like on the base. Because the top is beautiful, but the base is where I put in all the time and work. So to go from literally being scared to use the lathe and taking some design risks that I wasn't even sure I could execute on, seeing this come together is something I'm proud of. Well, I told you at the very beginning of this video that this was the first table I had ever built. And it's only kind of true because technically this is the first table I ever built, which I then rebuilt into this. But even since then, this table has been through a flood where the ceiling collapsed right above it. We've added a table's worst nightmare to the family and his partner in crime. So it's time. Out with the old, in with the new.
Oh, it looks so good. Lively, what do you think?
So cool. I love it.
Oh, it looks so pretty. Don't you think the darker color looks better in here? Oh, it's so pretty.
Thank you.
It looks good with my red. Oh, look. Oh, I love that sentimental stuff. Oh my gosh, is it color?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
They all picked up their colors.
Oh, that's so cute. Oh my gosh, how do you get their hands so perfect? Oh, that's so cute. I love that. Now we really have to have this one forever.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel a ton. Your engagement with this video is not only what keeps me going, but it's also how I can support doing this. So I greatly appreciate it. If you have any thoughts or questions, maybe you particularly liked a part of this video or really didn't like a part of this video, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Unless you're going to criticize my turning skills, just keep that to yourself. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time.